We'll do the whole testing, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, I hear
Welcome.
you. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. So hello, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
I'm Andrea Pinabell. I am the president of Southface Institute and am moderating today's session entitled Addressing Climate Crisis via Advocacy, Policy, and Adaptation. I hope you have enjoyed the sessions or the full workshop so far. I know I have been, and am excited about this panel. So I thought I would get it kicked off. I'll tell you just a little bit about Southface, and then we're going to go into introductions of our panelists. They're going to tell you a little bit about themselves, their background and experience, and then we're going to go straight into some moderated questions. So since 1978, Southface Institute has been leading the way towards a sustainable, equitable, and healthy built environment for all. Our programs close the gap between environmental awareness and action, scaling resource efficiency and clean energy solutions at all scales of homes, workplaces, and communities. At Southface, we are working to achieve climate mitigation and resilience at the intersection of the natural and built environments, increase health and equity through the built environment, and build the knowledge base and the workforce to catalyze the transition to a regenerative economy. In addition to the strategic partnership that we have with Florida House, Southface and I am very thrilled to be part of this important workshop to help support the great work that's been going on across the greater Sarasota area. I'm also thrilled to introduce this impressive panel today, who are all just amazing leaders with their significant experience and achievements in their respective specialties. So as I said earlier, I'll be introducing them one by one and give them a few minutes, 3 to 5 minutes each, to be able to talk a little bit about their backgrounds and philosophies in particular on addressing this climate crisis. And as a reminder, I have a few questions that will be moderated, but please do put your questions into the chat box and we will be addressing those a little bit later. So first up is Bob. Bob Bunting is the CEO of the recently founded Climate Adaptation Center located here in Sarasota. Bob, over to you.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. I'll just give you a little bit of background just on myself. I'm a climate scientist, but in my career, I have been the CEO of a company that's now on the New York Stock Exchange. I'm a university professor, and also I was the lead forecaster for NOAA and a director of the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. And the Climate Adaptation Center is the first of a kind. It's just starting here in Sarasota, and our big idea is to bring global climate warming to the local level and convert science into actionable information so that our governments at all levels, state, local, town governments, academic institutions, and private sector companies can all use the information tailored to our local area to advance decision making and to regionalize the adaptation and mitigation strategies for the climate warming that's already in the system that we're going to have to deal with no matter what the solution is to the global problem eventually. So that's what the Climate Center is about. This is really our first full year of operation. And actually tomorrow we'll be launching our All Singing, All Dancing website, the climateadaptationcenter.org. And so we hope that everyone here will take a look at it. There's some very interesting things on the website about the 4 or 5 big things we have to deal with in the west coast of Florida, including more rapidly developing hurricanes that are more frequent, sea level rise, the outbreaks of harmful algae blooms, the impacts of the warming that we already have on human health and on the health of our environmental system. And so we hope to translate science in a way that society can use it to plan and implement the adaptation and mitigation strategies to protect our own area, because climate change, while it's global, affects us right here in our backyard.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we just heard, the preparing for the disruption in the session just before this. So I think the Climate Adaptation Center is a very exciting movement, and excited to learn a little bit more about that. So next up is Joe. So Joe Hobbs is a youth climate activist with Fridays for Future movement. Joe, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into the climate movement?
Sure. Hello, all. I'm Joe. I'm a 17-year-old climate activist based out of Maryland. What kind of got me started was last year, the big march that we had in DC. I went to that, and ever since then, I've just got more involved in the climate movement. Now I've organized international events, national events, and local events at all different stages, bringing anywhere from 10 participants to 10,000 to 10 million on a global level. And I really just believe that really to fight this fight that we're trying to fight is to bring together all the youth and really everyone and go from bottom up. That's what I believe.
Joe. And finally, but certainly not least, is Mark Paul. Mark is an assistant professor of economics at New College of Florida. Mark?
Oh, it's great to be here with you all today. Thank you so much for joining us. By day, I'm a professor here at New College in Economics and Environmental Studies, and then by evenings and weekends, I work as a fellow at the Roosevelt Institute and Data for Progress, two think tanks, both of which do a tremendous amount of work on climate and rebuilding the economy to reorient towards a sustainable economy that not only tackles the climate crisis, but also addresses the other inherent crisis that is inextricably linked to climate, and that is economic inequality. So most of my work is centered on trying to understand how can we rapidly transition the United States economy away from a fossil fuel-based economy to one that is green, to one that is sustainable, and to one that is just. That means not only do we not leave behind fossil fuel workers in their communities, but we also pay particular attention to frontline communities, environmental justice communities, which have bared the brunt of climate damages to date. Most of published work is looking at different types of climate policies and evaluating and designing those. Recently, I published a piece that I can share in the chat on the economics of deep decarbonization. And the way I think about climate policy is really the fact that we need three different legs to the climate policy stool. We lead with investment, that's large scale investment to rapidly transition the economy and create millions of union jobs that are well-paying jobs from coast to coast. And so we utilize smart regulations to help transition various sectors. The transportation sector today is the largest emitting sector in the United States. And things like vehicle fuel efficiency standards are absolutely vital in order to help transition different sectors of the economy. And third, thinking about carbon pricing, but doing so in ways that does not commodify the environment, and also doing so in ways that protects the income of the majority of Americans. The last thing we want to be doing here is, taxing people for just them trying to drive to work and leaving them worse off than they were before. But in fact, we've been able to design climate solutions that improve incomes of the majority of Americans, particularly those at the bottom of the income distribution, while simultaneously, incentivizing people, companies, and governments to transition to a clean economy.
Thank you, Mark. You guys can tell everybody who's in this session that we have just a really robust, but different ways of advocating during this climate crisis and addressing the myriad of issues that, from policy to action to mitigation to adaptation. And so let's just jump right in with the first question. And as a reminder for those of you who are in the session, please don't hesitate to drop your questions into the chat, and we will get to your questions as quickly as we possibly can. All right, so question number one, and we're going to start with Bob, with you on this one, and then we'll move to Mark and finish up with Joe. So climate issues are certainly global, but as we addressed just in the last few minutes, they're felt very locally. In your opinion, what is the most important local climate related? What are the local most important climate related issues, and what strategies should we be undertaking to address these issues? So Bob, start with you. Bob, can you hear us? All right, why don't we, Mark, why don't we go to you, and then hopefully he can get back, his internet can get a little bit better.
Well, thank you.
You're back.
Locally, I think we have climate issues, but I think one of the bigger...
We're having a little bit of a hard time hearing you, Bob. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit challenging. You keep going in and out.
Can you hear me? Oh,
that's better. Sure. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Is that okay? Is that better? Okay, great. So what I would say is that, of course, we have local issues that are directly related to the climate warming, but one of the biggest real overriding issues we have is that we don't really have an infrastructure in our area and region to deal with the mitigation and the adaptation actions in a coordinated way. We're too fractured in how we are used to operating to solve problems. Every little town and community has its own beach renourishment plan, for example. And what one town does seems to affect the others, and sometimes one town will sue another one. We not working together at a high enough level to develop regional solutions and wasting money. So one of the things that the climate adaptation to do more
having a really hard time, Bob, we're having a really hard time hearing you.
Understanding to better. We spent $1 million putting each, but we rebuilt the dune systems and updated those dune systems with proper plans. We have a lot of that.
Bob? Bob,
really having
Bob,
regional.
Bob, I'm sorry. We're having a really hard time hearing you. So I'm gonna mute you right now, and I'll send you a message maybe, and you can find a more clear spot to do this. All right, and we will move over to Mark. Again, the question is, climate issues are certainly global, but felt locally. What are the most important local climate related issues, and what strategies should we be undertaking to address these issues?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the challenges associated with climate change historically is people kept thinking, this is a problem for our great-grandchildren. This is a problem for polar bears in Alaska. This is a problem for sea otters and sea lions. People only recently are waking up to the fact that, no, this is a problem for the here and now. This is not only affecting my life, but my children's lives and my family's lives and my loved ones' lives. So I think, unfortunately, we have to allow the planet to warm by 1.1 degrees Celsius already for people to start kind of becoming increasingly aware that the climate crisis isn't a far off problem, but it's here and now, and it threatens our very livelihoods. Here in Florida, we are one of the most climate prone states in the nation. We are living in Sarasota. Sarasota is going to be, in very, very serious trouble just at 2 degrees C. And that translates, for those of you who might not be aware, to about 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, we need to do everything we can to limit global warming to 1.5 to 2 degrees C. But I'm not going to lie, that is becoming an increasingly uphill battle every single day. Now, that's not saying it's not able to be attained. We have the know-how, we have the workers, we have the solar panels, we have the wind turbines, we have all the most of the technology we need. What we don't have right now is the political will. And that's where I think most of us should be focusing our actions at the local level, is how is it that we can start holding our local officials accountable for their inaction on climate. Sarasota, the city, for instance, is starting to do some things, but the county and the state writ large has been a massive laggard in terms of climate. If we look at the state of Florida, we could be getting well over half of our energy today through clean and renewable energy, and that would not lead to any higher costs for consumers. In fact, it would lead to massive improvements in our air quality. Unfortunately, 250,000 premature deaths occur every year in the United States from air pollution associated with fossil fuels. But instead, in Florida, we have just 3% of our energy coming from wind and solar. It's despicable. But the thing is, that's not because wind and solar are expensive. In fact, they're cheaper than fossil fuels today. It's because we have policymakers in power that are in bed with the fossil fuel companies, that are in bed with the utility companies, and that are failing to stand up for our well-being and our livelihoods. So I think the most important thing that we start doing is talking more about climate change, having these conversations with our friends, our family, over Thanksgiving that's coming up. Just one conversation a day about climate change can start making a difference. Then start getting involved. Nobody's too young or too old to start partaking in a different group, whether it be the Sunrise Movement, the group Joe's going to talk about shortly, or the movement, sorry, that Joe's going to talk about shortly, whether it be 350.org or the Sierra Club. There's so many different climate groups out there for you to get involved in, many of which have local chapters. So I'd urge you to get involved. Here in Florida, we know that this isn't something for the far off. I mean, we're already trucking in sand on a regular basis to our beaches because they're getting eroded on a regular basis. We know that the most of the keys, those are gone at 2C. I mean, they're gone within within some of our lifetimes. But unfortunately, we just don't have leaders that are willing to take this issue seriously. The good news is that most voters take this issue seriously. Right now, climate change is consistently the number 1 or 2 issue for Democrats. And as a matter of fact, a new poll just came out yesterday from Politico showing that 70% of registered voters support a transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy, including 55% of Republicans. Right? So a lot of the times, Republican rank and file voters support these changes. Our neighbors often support these changes. Who doesn't support these changes is our elected officials, and those are the people we need to band together and start demanding change from.
Thank you, Mark. And Joe, you're not quite old enough to vote yet. So talk to me about what are the issues and the strategies that are important to today's youth, and where and how, by becoming part of this program or being part of this movement, are you hoping to hold the leaders, but also the adults, accountable for their actions?
And I hate being reminded about the voting because I missed it by 2 months, and it's very disappointing to not be able to vote in this election, especially. Every day, I'm very sad about it. Wake up, think about it, very sad. But I do think that I agree with Mark on a lot of this. The issue with Maryland is Maryland recognizes the issue with climate change and they're making progress towards working on it. It's not fast enough progress. And I especially look at the county I live in, Howard County. I think a couple months after Trump announced that we were leaving the Paris Climate Agreement as the US, the county I live in announced that they will follow the Paris Climate Accord, even though the US isn't, and follow all those general restrictions. And I think that that's really important to do at a local level and even a state level, if possible. And I think one of the issues is the country as a whole, states as a whole, counties as a whole, fast enough to nobody's realizing the importance of this issue. We're really looking at, a couple years before we reach a no turn back point. And even if we somehow plateau right now, it's still looking pretty bad in the future if we don't make some sudden changes. And I think a lot of people don't want to make those changes. A lot of people realize that those changes will cost money. They will take time. They may affect your day-to-day life, but that's kind of the sacrifices that we need to make. And a lot of what the youth movement wants to do is to prove to people that you may make sacrifices. We miss school on Fridays, but it's necessary for the greater good, because what's the point of going to school if there isn't going to be a whole lot of your life to live? With the earth dying around you when I'm 60, 70, not sure if I really want to live too much like that. And I think that it's really like 100 years ago, you may not be thinking about this because it doesn't directly affect you. But if this isn't directly affecting me, it's directly affecting my children. And I think that that's a really important that we need to fight. And especially holding our leaders accountable. A lot of the issues we have is a lot of people. And as Mark said, especially in America, a lot of the different political beliefs are starting to realize that this is important. I haven't seen that data on the recent Republicans, and 55% of them agree with this, but it's not a surprise. You look in the climate movement, we're starting to see a lot more participation from both sides, the Republicans and the Democrats, both realizing how important this is. And I really think that we need a transition to working together more and going across the aisle and putting together a plan to fight this issue.
And I think that's really, really important, because historically, when we talked about climate change, we talked about our children and our children's children. But as we've heard throughout the day, this is affecting Sarasota today. It's affecting Florida today. It's affecting other states today. And that really helps to bring it home. And it not only affects all of us, but jumping down sort of a little bit later in the conversation, is that what we heard earlier a lot is that it affects vulnerable and underserved communities at a higher and more intense degree than it affects others who are more affluent. How can the climate movement ensure that everyone feels the benefits of this positive change? And Joe, we'll start there.
I think that really important is people may not directly feel these benefits, and I think that's the big issue we have, is people don't recognize their day-to-day life may be the same a lot of the time, but when you look at the overall picture, you're breathing in cleaner air, you're living for a longer time, you're transitioning to renewable energy, which is overall cheaper in the long run. Obviously it costs a bit more to start it up, but it is already becoming cheaper than fossil fuels, and that's with fossil fuels having subsidies. And I think that really the direct effect is the long run sustainable.
Welcome back, Bob. Okay, well, we will hopefully we'll get the audio going for you, Bob. So Mark, over to you. You talked a lot about federal policy and local policy. What is the role of policymakers at all those levels, at the local, regional, state, and federal, to ensure that the vulnerable and the vulnerable communities, the underserved communities, actually reap the benefits of the change in policy?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Andrea. So, we have a lot of different examples historically of the US going through these large transitions. We know that anytime we have a significant restructuring of the economy, like we need to undergo in order to decarbonize, there's going to be massive redistribution consequences. The question is, do we let that happen haphazardly, which will most likely entrench existing inequalities? Or do we be intentional about the redistribution and ensure that the climate policies we pursue end up trying to help address not only the environmental justice wrongs that we've done historically, but also the long-standing systemic racism in our economy itself. So there's a lot of success stories around the world that we can look at, as well as here in the United States. The one I'll point to is New York State right now. New York State just about a little over a year ago passed basically what amounts to a state level Green New Deal, a massive investment program for the state to push towards decarbonization rapidly. And one of the most important things that New York State did is they guaranteed 30 to 40% of the investment in frontline communities. That's both those investments taking place in frontline communities and employing frontline workers. So I think that New York is really pushing the envelope here. Yet at the federal level, we also have a lot of examples of public policies that have intentionally built the modern middle class. So the best example is the New Deal, and we can go back to the New Deal and see how policies that FDR passed fundamentally built the white middle class. However, one of the problems was it systematically excluded people of color, in particular Black families, through policies like redlining. And we can right those wrongs both at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. I dropped in the chat for folks that are interested 2 recent policy reports I wrote. One was for the Southern Economic Advancement Project, which I wrote with Professor Leah Stokes at UC Santa Barbara. And this was for Stacey Abrams's new organization that she just launched, which is focused on building economic empowerment and sustainability in the Southeast. So that provides a whole host of policy measures that we should be undertaking at the state and local level, particularly here in the Southeast US. At the federal level, I posted a report that I wrote for the Roosevelt Institute that really talks again about an investment-led strategy. And the key here is that when we look at our current economic crisis and we see that we have 25 million Americans that are unemployed, we know that unfortunately the people who are disproportionately unemployed are people of color, are the youth, and are actually women right now. And so by passing large-scale investment projects to decarbonize every building in the United States, let's start with our schools, let's start with our libraries, let's start with our town buildings, all things that are going to save school districts and cities money. We can be employing those workers at living wage jobs to not only provide us with climate benefits, but also provide us with economic benefits, societal benefits, and additional comfort measures. I'm sitting right now in Massachusetts. I normally live in Florida, but I'm sitting right now in Massachusetts in an old farmhouse from 1800. And let me tell you, it's a little chilly and a little drafty. And I would sure like a federal program to help retrofit this house and better insulate it and put some new windows in. Down in Florida, what we're talking about is, programs that are going to help us better cool our homes. We have thousands of Americans dying every year from heat-related disease deaths. These are completely preventable. And unfortunately, it's just poor policy measures that we've pursued to date.
Mark, welcome back, Bob.
Gosh, talk about live TV.
We are talking about how climate change affects vulnerable and underserved communities at a greater scale. A theme that we've been hearing all day long. And my question to you is, from your perspective, from the Climate Adaptation Center, and through your experience, how can the climate movement ensure that everyone feels the benefit of policy changes and of other positive changes?
I think it's really a question of will, and unfortunately, we have the inequalities that we have. So it's very important that when we do things like change our codes for buildings, that they're systematic across the region, and that we have programs that help people implement those codes so that they can actually be used. There's going to be so much requirement to retrofit things that exist today, because we just can't knock every building down and start from scratch. But when you think about it, we have so many people that need noble work. And in an economy that's as efficient as ours, even before COVID hit, we really had a lot of underemployed and poorly employed people that really aren't needed anymore, because the economy can produce most goods and services with far fewer than full employment. But in the climate economy, we have so much work to do to retrofit our society to survive well climate warming and to thrive in a time when we really can't dial it back, but we're going to have to deal with it, that we can produce the climate economy workforce using our university and education system, using our private sector, and using our government sectors in a more coordinated way, where the three sectors are pushed together and work together to solve a really big issue that's a worldwide issue, but is felt in a local community. So when for instance, when the hurricanes go through New Orleans and wipe out the 6th district, all of those houses were eventually bulldozed. Where did those people go? So we have to get people out of harm's way, and we have to give them a pathway to a different life where they can contribute to the climate economy, be part of it, help produce the answers, and earn income. I think it's one of the best economic drivers that we're going to see, certainly in Florida, which has $1 trillion economy now, but also around the world. And we have the opportunity to use our knowledge, but also to use our organizational skills to push this up in the local area and show how we can be resilient. And if we can show how we can do it here at climate change ground zero, I call it. If we can show how we can do it here, then we can use the same infrastructure, the same processes, the same databases, and the same approach in other communities to help bring people together in a more equitable way to solve this problem. When we're all working together to solve it, it's going to get done. When we have to take money from Peter to pay Paul, that's the problem, because we're not making the pie bigger. We're splitting the pie into narrower pieces. And what social justice to one group looks like the other group is being impeded against. But so we have to, work together and create value together that rewards everyone together, in my opinion.
Mark, do you have a?
Yeah, I think, by and large, I agree with Bob, but I just kind of interject one thing. Right now, one of the biggest problems we have in our country is runaway inequality. Not only does this runaway inequality lead to significantly higher carbon emissions than we would have otherwise, and as a matter of fact, the richest 10% in the US pollute about 8 times more than the average American. And the richest 1% pollute over 15 times more than the average American. But one of the problems with inequality is that it allows the rich to capture our political system, and it allows the rich to stop climate action. Why? Because they own the fossil fuel companies. So, by and large, I agree we should be focusing on growing the pie, and when we're talking about, the bottom 95%, we're trying to move everybody forward here. But I do think, thinking about how we can be taxing the rich, not only because we might want to utilize their resources and make sure that they don't own 3 homes, right? Most people in I don't know the percentage in Sarasota, but, well over a quarter of the homes and residents in Sarasota are 2nd, 3rd homes, right? People shouldn't be able to have 2nd and 3rd homes like this that they do right now. It causes climate change, but it also allows them to capture our democracy. So, taxing high income earners creates more space in the economy for us to put even more people to work, decarbonizing even faster, but it also allows us to push back against their political capital.
Thanks, Mark. That's a great lead into the next
And if
question.
I could just say one more thing regarding.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Bob.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I was just going to say, you know, in my view, is when climate action becomes tied to economic success, and I'm not just talking about for the rich people, I'm talking about for the people, that's when it's going to happen. You know, government, I've been in government, you know, for 45 years, and my colleagues in government have very good aspirations and they want to do the right thing. They work really hard and they want to produce results for the people. But the government follows the people. They don't lead the people, except in rare cases. Public opinion shapes the government that we have, and we have to build it from the ground up. And, you know, in recent years, it's been more of a top-down thing. So the more that people see climate change as not just a threat, but an opportunity, the sooner we'll transition to real solutions that are supported across the economic strata. And if we're trying to blame one group for the fact that we have climate warming, it may be justified, but the fact is we have it. It's here, and we have to deal with it the way it is. And we can't dial it back right now. Even if we stopped all the carbon emissions today, the Earth would warm for another 50 years. That's essentially one more lifetime we're going to have to deal with it, even if we knew what the answer was today. So I feel like a more productive approach is one based on equity, but also on the knowledge that we can make a difference if we work together and we know how to do large projects when we want to. We put people on the moon in 10 years with technology that was, you know, 10% of what we have today. We decided to do it, and government, industry, and free enterprise worked together to do that, and the technology out of that fueled our economy for the next 50 years. The same thing can happen here, but I think we have to do it from a more positive baseline, eliminating blame and bringing people into the process and making sure that everyone wins at the end. It's a win-win scenario, not I win and you lose. We've been playing that for a long time, and that's why we haven't made much progress.
So we bled into the next question, and then I will get to the participants' questions as well. Is we talked a lot when we were prepping for this panel on what is more a more viable approach, a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. And Mark, you noted this earlier that there seems to be a significant difference between the thoughts of most Americans, whether you're Democrat or Republican, and the policies that and the philosophies around climate change that are in the White House today or at the State House, right? Because Florida traditionally has been a red state. And we'll start with Joe here, if you have anything to add here, Joe, because I think it's interesting. Why do you think that is? If the people are really driving, right? If we kind of think about the bottom up, the people's will should say that if majority of Americans feel like it should be X, then why are we not doing X? And I know we've talked a little bit about it. So Joe, if you have any thoughts, and then we're going to go, quickly to Mark and Bob, and then I want to get to the questions in the chat as well.
Yeah, I'd love to answer this. A very simple answer to this, and it's that America was not created to benefit the poor. It was not made to benefit the citizens. It was made to benefit the leaders, the rich, the people in government. And a great example is the electoral system. It's got a lot of flaws of its own. Or our voting system, but I do feel like a lot of the way American politics are made, a lot of the policies we create are really there to benefit someone rich, companies, politicians who in 2 years will retire and then get a bunch of funding from contractors for doing things. It's a lot of those kind of people that make the most money out of this. And I think that you look at it, it's very obvious that people are supporting, systematic change in the police force. They want to support not the Green Deal specifically, but some kind of deal that works on climate change. They want their local communities to change, and it's just not happening. And I think one of the big issues there is that politicians aren't listening. But I think that at the end of the day, whether it be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, politics in America will change to start listening to the citizens more. And I'm really looking forward to that happening.
Thank you, Joe. Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, Joe hit on a lot of it. The only thing I would add is two small things. One, we have done a tremendous amount of research, and we know that, unfortunately, a lot of the time, senior staff of elected officials don't actually know or pay attention to what popular opinion is. They pay attention to who gets in their door, and who gets in their door? Lobbyists. And who has the money to hire lots and lots of lobbyists? Oil and gas companies. They have amazing returns on their investments through hiring lobbyists. I mean, it's just astronomical. So, unfortunately, we need to reckon with that fact, and we have a serious money in politics problem where, we have a government that does not respond to the people. That said, I do think that when you get large enough mass movements, looking to Martin Luther King's "Where do we go from here?" in particular, we know that mass mobilization of the people, getting at least 3.5% of the people in the streets, does indeed force government's hand. And when we look back to the New Deal, again, what forced government's hand? It was the, kind of concern over the rapidly growing communism, which, is what it is. And it was concern over very militant trade unionists that were regularly striking and pushing for a much more radical redistribution of the economy than what FDR ended up passing. So you need a left flank in order to hold the government accountable. When it comes to climate, it's not necessarily about left or right. It's about, let's think about the science, right? Bob's a scientist here. Listen to the scientists.
Exactly.
And then from there, we can craft public policy that takes climate, that takes the science seriously. Then we can have a discussion of, well, what does a left or right policy look like that actually decarbonizes by a specific date and things along those lines. And those are the discussions that I wish we were having, but that's not where we are, unfortunately, today.
Hopefully soon.
I agree with both of you guys. I'm sure that's no surprise, but the one comment I would make is in my role when I was at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, one of my jobs was to make sure the money landed in the bank account every year to fund the institute. And so I spent a lot of time at the National Science Foundation and in Washington, D.C., working with congressional staff, et cetera. And it was a very eye-opening experience because what I realized is that the Congress passes these laws and they're about 3 pages long. And then all the interest groups come in, and when they come out, the law is 3,000 pages long and loaded with what everybody wants. And these are the people who have paid for the elections because companies are now treated like people. They can give huge amounts of money for campaigns, and campaigns, for instance, for the presidency this year are costing $2 billion. We used to have presidential campaigns that cost $50 million. And so when we changed from people give donations to companies or people, it changed the equation. And then when they make these donations, they basically buy the congressional process, and they go in. And when Nancy Pelosi said, well, we'll pass the Obamacare and we'll read it later, I mean, part of what she was saying was, there's no way we can read all of this. We didn't write all of this. This was all written by lobbyists, except for the first 3 pages. And that's why we don't know what's in our rules and regulations until after, and unintended consequences then become part of the system in a routine way where they didn't used to do that. So until we get, buying elections, and I mean that not in the sense that it's legal now to do that, it's going to be very hard for the government to really represent the people, because it's representing the money that pays for these elections. It's not rocket science to understand this. So I mean, reform is possible. We don't need to have a new regime. We need to go back to the basics, the way we used to do things and get things done. We've drifted away from that in the last 25 years, and that's why the climate, although it's a big topic, has not really had much real, other than talk. There hasn't really been much action, and I'm not talking about Democrats or Republicans. I'm talking about all of them. All of them talk different, but the results have been basically the same. I've worked under Republican and Democratic presidents. There hasn't been much of a difference when it comes to the bottom line. And so, when I say, well, we've got to vote them out, the choices we have really do not represent what the people want now, because the people are not really paying the freight. Somebody else is paying it.
Yeah. And with that, I believe we are out of time, but I want to give all of our great panelists in 30 seconds or less, if somebody's listening to this panel and they want to have one action beyond voting. We all know that's where we really need to vote. But beyond voting, what should they do to advocate and to address climate change in the most effective way? And Mark, we'll start with you. Definitely
vote, but get involved in the political system. Go join, again, your local Sunrise chapter, your local 350 chapter, your local Sierra Club chapter, whatever aspect of the environment speaks to you, get and start demanding change of your elected officials.
Great. And I already voted. I early voted, so I have checked that box. Bob, how about you?
Ballot questions, not just the people.
I would say the most important thing for people in our local area, tune in to the climateadaptationcenter.org and get organized, because we're going to bring it.
Fantastic. And Joe.
Vote, and be disappointed if someone who has the ability to vote doesn't vote. And we're already in record turnout for voters, so I'm always happy to see that. But besides voting, research your local policies on climate change and see what your local government's doing. Not even state, just go county or local city. See what they're doing. Talk to an elected official, or find out, like Mark said, Sunrise, 350, Sierra. They all do amazing work. Work with them, see how you can help out, and get involved in the political process locally and see what you can do.
Thank you, Joe. And one of the favorite things I heard today was retrofit America. How can we really embrace embodied carbon and not create or increase emissions? So retrofit America, I love it. Well, thank you, Mark Paul, Joe Hobbs, Bob Bunting. I really enjoyed today's conversation. Bob, I'm really glad you found a place where we could hear you and see you. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the afternoon. Have a great day. Thank you.